Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. Recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana for questions, and I hope you will give Chairman Steil a chance to respond to some of this.
Sure. Actually, I would love for Chairman Steil to respond, and then I'd be happy to go into some of my questions.
Well, I think what's so important is that we're making sure that people are participating in our elections. And what we have seen time and again is the integrity in our elections increase. People are more likely to participate. It's actually the reason when we introduced a series of election integrity bills that we did that in Atlanta, Georgia. Because I think a lot of people remember the lies that were spewed about the election integrity legislation in the state of Georgia. In fact, President Biden made statements that even the Washington Post called out is earning Pinocchios for being so misleading to the American people about what the state of Georgia was doing when they were implementing their voter integrity legislation. You may recall Major League Baseball bought into those lies. They moved out the All-Star game out of Atlanta. But what we can do now is go back and look at the empirical data of the 2022 election. And what we saw is high voter participation, and the University of Georgia did a robust study analyzing the elections after they took place. And what the University of Georgia found is that people actually were very supportive of how the elections were run, and across all key demographic groups, in particular blacks in the state of Georgia, had a very positive view of how those elections operated, in direct contrast with the misleading statements and, in fact, lies by some on the left of what the bill would actually do. And so what we see time and again, and the empirical evidence shows this, is that when we actually increase the integrity of our elections, more people are likely to participate, and that's a good thing. And so when we look at this legislation, this is an opportunity to further enhance the integrity of our elections and actually increase total voter participation of U.S. citizens.
Thank you. On Joe Biden's first day in office, he issued a myriad of executive orders. Some of those I will highlight here. One, repealed a previous executive order by President Trump, which had secured the southern border, took all that away. All of those policies that were keeping the border secure were undone by Joe Biden on day one. Another executive order on day one stopped funds from being directed toward border wall construction. And then another executive order allows for non-citizens to be counted in the census data for electoral college and congressional apportionment. Now, under President Biden, we've seen millions of illegal aliens being released into the interior of the United States, 2 million known gotaways. The Biden administration's failure at the southern border has been well documented. It is a complete and total disaster. In addition to the executive order President Biden signed on day one, he also made an executive order that said, it was the executive order on promoting access to voting that requires federal agencies to expand opportunities to register to vote. So all of these things are pointing in a direction, at least pointing in a direction that I believe is wrong for the United States of America, and it undermines our system of democracy, which is why I support the SAVE Act. The failure to secure the southern border is one thing, but in what we've heard today in this committee and from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that they unbelievably think that we're somehow diminishing the vote or the opportunity to vote of American citizens by requiring proof of citizenship for someone to vote. How does that, Mr. Steil, Chairman Steil, does it diminish the opportunities for U.S. citizens to express their viewpoints at the ballot box by allowing non-citizens to vote?
Every non-citizen that votes cancels out the vote of a U.S. citizen. And so when we look at the instances of non-citizens voting, and again, there's ample evidence of non-citizens voting in U.S. elections, each person who has voted illegally as a non-citizen is canceling out the vote of a legal U.S. citizen. And that's why there should be such concern. And then you correctly note what this administration is doing. I think that's really important, Ms. Houchin, is you correctly lay out that on day one, the Biden administration comes in and unwinds the secure border policies of President Trump, and we see a massive rush of individuals enter the country illegally and then enter throughout the country. You combine that then with the president's executive order, which you also noted, 14019, which is weaponizing federal agencies in the engagement of a partisan get-out-the-vote effort. And in fact, inside that executive order, the administration required each federal agency to come up with a strategic plan. But they won't give that strategic plan to me or to the American people, and that should be incredibly concerning, that this administration has weaponized federal agencies to develop a secretive scheme to use federal agencies to drive forward a partisan agenda as it relates to elections. And you couple that with the open border policies of this administration, it should give great concern to Americans across the board. And when we look at an opportunity here to simply say, what we want to do is make sure that U.S. elections are for U.S. citizens, to make sure that we're not allowing the NVRA to be used as a block from checking whether or not an individual is a U.S. citizen. This legislation gives us an opportunity to make sure it's U.S. citizens who are participating in U.S. elections.
Thank you. And it's interesting that not only do our colleagues on the other side of the aisle not want to require U.S. citizenship as a matter of who should be voting in this country, but they also do not support voter ID laws to make sure that it is one person, one vote. Chairman Steil, the ranking member has made some claims that requiring proof of citizenship creates a hardship for citizens. I'd like you to just, and you've done this somewhat, but I'd like you to just provide a counter to that. In your view, articulate why the ranking member is wrong in his claim that there's some sort of a hardship for citizens simply by requiring them to prove that they're U.S. citizens to vote.
So we offer a series of opportunities for an individual to provide documentary proof of citizenship. So obviously the passport, it was referenced by my colleague, that is one opportunity. We could look at Real ID for those Real IDs that have U.S. citizenship denoted on it. More states should take advantage of that inside Real ID so that it can be utilized. But again, today, under current law, states aren't allowed to even validate the individual who checks the box to say they're a U.S. citizen is a U.S. citizen. So many states didn't put that in the requirements. A huge opportunity when we clean this up after this bill passes to make sure that Real ID has that opportunity where states can then quickly validate that. That's going to be a huge opportunity. And then we look at the EAC to put forward guidance to states to address some of the concerns that have been brought up, to make sure that an individual who has a name change, et cetera, has that opportunity to not be burdened as they go to vote. But again, under current law, states aren't even allowed to review whether or not an individual is a U.S. citizen. This bill not only gives the opportunity, but requires it, which I think is essential to make sure that it's U.S. citizens that are participating in U.S. elections.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this issue of election integrity. It's extremely important, and I yield back.